Mr. Mayor, we have all members present with the exception of the Vice Deputy Mayor at this time. It's 6:30 and you may begin.
Okay, thank you, Linda. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order this Planning Committee meeting and welcome all members of the committee and all members of the public who are watching us on the live stream this evening. We're glad you're with us. The second item on the agenda is additions, deletions, amendments to the agenda. We don't have any of those. So the third item is disclosures of pecuniary interest. Ask any member if you have one of those you'd like to declare at this time. Seeing none, of course, you can do that anytime if you need to. That moves on to adoption of minutes. We don't have any minutes tonight, so we're on to public meetings, and we have two public meetings this evening, and I'll just run through how those meetings will work so that everyone's on the same page. We'll begin each public meeting with a presentation by our planner, following which we'll open the public meeting and we'll begin by hearing from the applicant or their representative. And then once we've heard from the applicant, we will open the floor up to members of the public who have comments they'd like to make about either of the applications. Once we've heard from the members of the public, we'll turn the floor back over to members of council to ask any questions for clarification that they may have. Council will not be making final decisions on either of these files that are before us for public meetings this evening. Our interest this evening is to hear from the public and have the public comments inform the decision-making process, and a decision point will come at a future meeting. So that's the process, and we'll get started. Our first public meeting, 5.1, is on L 2021-014 and Z 2021-071, JK Development, GP2 Limited, Highway 21 and Bruce Road 25, and we'll turn it over to our planner, Karina.
Thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. Can everyone see my screen? Hopefully I am sharing my presentation.
Yep, we got you.
Okay, perfect. So I am presenting this evening on a local official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment. The applicant in this case is JK Development GP2 Limited. The owner is Barry's Construction and Installation, and the agent is Mr. Ron Davidson, who is also available this evening for questions. The purpose of these applications is to amend the local official plan by increasing the maximum density permitted in the residential designation from 90 to 109.6 units per gross hectare. You can see the local official plan designation in the top map on your screen. The larger parcel, which is highlighted, is kind of the larger land holding, and you'll see in the site plan that will be presented in the next slide. The actual area is a smaller portion. If you can see my cursor, it's actually this parcel here, part of that larger land holding. The purpose of the zoning bylaw amendment application is to change the current residential fourth density special holding zone to reduce the minimum lot area per dwelling unit to allow for an increased density on the site. In total, it would allow for 124 units. The proposal would also reduce the minimum visitor parking requirement from 0.25 to 0.097 parking spaces per unit, and that would be a reduction in the required visitor parking from 31 to 12 visitor parking spaces. And the proposal would also remove the requirement for a parking area to be set back at least 3 meters from the front lot line, and to also remove the requirement that the parking area occupy no more than 40% of the front yard. If approved, the amendments would facilitate construction of 2 4-story apartment buildings with a total of 124 residential units. So you can see the site plan on this slide here. It is a 4-story apartment building, 2 buildings in total with parking and landscaping to the yard areas. So the proposal has been reviewed and will be continued to be reviewed with respect to the policies that are in play. So it is a settlement area in Port Elgin on the south side of town. It is within a primary urban community according to the county official plan and designated residential in the Saugeen Shores official plan. The zoning, as noted earlier on the site, is currently R4, and that does permit apartment dwellings, townhouse dwellings among its permitted residential units. In this case, the applicant is looking to increase the permitted density in that location. In support of these applications, we did receive a planning justification report as well as a servicing feasibility review. So there are a couple of photos of the site. This is looking east towards Highway 21 and the commercial buildings that are currently existing to the east of the property. This is looking to the south. There are existing single-family homes to the south of the site, and those are bordered by landscaped area and manicured lawn. This is looking to the west towards additional vacant lands that are intended for future residential development, and further to the west, of course, would be Lake Huron. And this is a photo looking north. It's hard to tell based on the stockpiles that are currently on this parcel, but there are existing commercial enterprises to the north, as well as apartment buildings and townhouse dwellings as well. So based on our circulation, we did receive comments back from various agencies, including the town. Of note, I'll highlight from the town of Saugeen Shores, they have indicated that they would like a holding provision included that would ensure that servicing and access are adequately addressed. Currently, the road to the site has not yet been built, but is intended to be constructed as part of the larger subdivision works in this area. Servicing would also be extended to the area via the larger subdivision proposal as well. The town has also identified that they are generally supportive of all alternative parking provisions, provided it's clearly supported, and they have asked for additional justification from the applicant in this regard as it relates to the proposed reduction in visitor parking area. We did also receive comments from Enbridge Gas, who identified that they do have servicing lines in the area and that they should be contacted moving forward. There were no comments received from the Bruce Grey Catholic District School Board. And Canada Post also provided comments and indicated that for a multi-unit proposal such as this, they would require the installation of a lockbox assembly. I did want to highlight that this is a new slide from what was posted to the agenda. We did receive additional agency comments after the planning report was finalized. So we did receive comments from the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority, who indicated that this proposal is acceptable. There were no comments received from Bruce County Transportation and Environmental Services, given the proximity to County Road 25. And we did also most recently receive comments from the Committee on the Port Elgin Airport, who had identified that there are certain height restrictions in proximity to an airport. And I've highlighted here that specifically it's understood that this proposal would be under 45 meters in height and therefore would not be an obstruction to the aircraft departing or accessing the airport. In terms of public comments received, we did receive comments from neighboring landowners who are objecting to the proposal due to its scale and its location in proximity to the single detached dwellings to the south of the site. And I've identified those landowners here. We also most recently did receive a new comment from an agency or a member of the public, and this is specifically a new slide again from what was originally proposed or posted as part of the agenda. This is from the United Housing for All, who is a group that represents interests relating to affordable housing in the community. They have specifically identified that they are in favor of the proposal. It does build upon the town's interest to bring affordable housing and rental housing to the community. So in summary, the purpose of the application is to amend the local official plan to increase the maximum density permitted in the residential designation. It's also to amend the zoning bylaw by changing certain provisions within the existing residential fourth density zone. So the recommendation is that it be brought forward for your consideration and council and public comment, and we will come back with a later report once we've addressed any comments that may arise. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Karina. Well, we'll begin by opening up the public meeting, and first we'll want to hear from the applicant or the representative. I see Mr. Davidson there, so I assume, Mr. Davidson, you'll carry the ball for the applicant, and I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, members of council. So my name is Ron Davidson. I'm a planning consultant, and I have been retained by JK Development to assist with this project in helping me get the approvals I've prepared a planning report, which Karina has referenced, and I have no intentions of going through it all. I will sort of touch on the highlights, if you will. So to start off, let's back up a bit. John Nifton is the applicant, or his company is, and he's on the phone or with us tonight, or the screen here. He's not going to be part of the presentation, but right now, but he is here to answer questions, and I'm sure there may be some that I probably can't answer. So to start off with, John is looking at building 2 apartment buildings. Each will be 4 stories in height, and together they will provide for 124 units. And all of these units will be rentals. And that's I don't have to tell council, that's certainly a type of housing that's desperately needed in Saugeen Shores. And I think desperate is the right word. Last year, I was, when I did some homework, I understood that the vacancy rate was about 0.4%. I'm not sure if that has changed at all. If it has, it probably hasn't increased to any significant amount. And to put that in perspective, again, at 0.4%, typically anything under 3% is a concern. So there's no doubt that there's a rental housing problem. And I know that because every time I come to your council with a presentation, we're usually asked, where is the rental housing component? So hopefully this is seen as a good news project. And another piece of the good news is the fact that about 10% of the units will be affordable. John has been working with CMHC to obtain some funding in this regard. So as council is well aware, you have to follow your official plan and the provincial policy statement when you're making decisions regarding land use planning. Yes, this does require, pardon me, an amendment to the official plan to increase the density, but there are a whole bunch of policies in the official plan right now that does support this. You've got general policies that talk about making sure you have an efficient use of service land, and certainly there's probably nothing more efficient than an apartment building. We've also got very strong housing policies that make it very clear that you need a good assortment of housing in the community. I think it reads, housing for everyone, to make sure that everyone has a place to live. Unfortunately, not everyone can buy a home, and that's why we have rental housing. And as I just said, there is a rental housing problem in the area. So if the rental housing shortage problem, I guess this is more in my opinion, but hopefully it's shared by others. If we're ever going to resolve that problem in Saugeen Shores, and Kincardine is having the same problem, you're going to have to do it through higher density. It's one thing, yes, we do see from time to time the odd secondary unit in a house, and we do see some rental townhouses. But if you're really going to add a good number of rental units, it's going to be in the form of an apartment building where you can have a healthier density. The official plan also strongly encourages affordable rental housing. And there's a definition for that, but it's basically for those who need some help. And again, Mr. Nifton is trying to introduce about 10%, which would likely account for about 12 or 13 units in this development being affordable. That's it for the official plan. The provincial policy statement basically reads the same way, because the town's official plan and the county official plan were based in part on what the provincial policy document has to say, because we're required to follow that document. In terms of land use compatibility, yeah, there are 2 residents. I think they're both on the line tonight, and they do back onto this property. Their houses, for what it's worth, are pushed towards the front of their property, and by my math, from their house, not to their yard, but from their house to the closest building, there will be a separation distance of about 55 meters. Probably the person that would be impacted the greatest, if there was an impact, would be the developer in the subdivision that's going to happen to the west. Of course, he doesn't have an issue. He's the first person we contacted. He's actually selling the property to Mr. Nifton, and he's not concerned about an apartment building across the street from single-family dwellings. The last thing I'm going to say is with regard to the zoning bylaw. We are asking for relief from some zoning provisions with which Karina just went through. But I wish to point out a couple of things. We're not actually asking for a building height increase. As council's well aware, council changed the zoning bylaw, I think last July, to allow for building height in a certain area of town, and that would be within so many meters of the highway and Godwin Street, to go as high as 20 meters, or which is about 6 meters in height. And these buildings are 4 stories tall. I'm sorry, you go 6 stories in height, and these buildings will only be about 4 stories, for what that's worth. And that was done, obviously, that bylaw to increase the building height was done to facilitate development like this, a higher form of density. It's also worth noting that this proposed development will also conform with the lot coverage requirements, so a relief is not being requested from that. And same with landscaped open space. I know firsthand that landscape open space has been a concern of council in the past, and this proposal is not requesting relief from that. What we are requesting relief from, there are a few things, but one is parking. I've been asked to speak to a little bit about parking. So as you heard Karina say, there will be 124 parking spaces for the 124 units, and that's what the requirement is of the zoning bylaw, 1 per unit. But the bylaw also states for visitor parking, you have to have 1 space for every 4 units, which means you're supposed to have an additional 31 parking spaces, and the proposal is just for 12 parking spaces for visitor. So what that means, trying to put this in perspective, if 10% of the residents in the building have a visitor at any given time, then everybody will have a parking space. But the bylaw right now with 25% means that you would have to have, you would assume that 25% of the apartment units would have visitors at any given time. That seems high. It does seem, in my mind anyways, that a reduced parking standard would be fine. If Mr. Nifton would lose here, I guess, if you will, if he provided a type of development that did not need parking. He can speak to this, but he's done other developments in the past with reduced parking standards. So again, I suggest to council that a reduced parking standard for visitor parking should be fine here. On a final note, though, if it isn't, the only way to meet parking would be to reduce the number of units, which means reduce the number of rental units, which hopefully that doesn't have to come to that, because I don't think a lot of people would want to see fewer rental units being constructed at this particular time. Mr. Mayor, that's it for my presentation. I am done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else on the applicant's team who wants to speak, or are you it for now, Ron?
I think unless John wants to pipe in, but I don't think he does. I think he just wants to answer questions.
Okay, that's good enough. All right, then before we get to that point, we'll turn things over to members of the public who are interested in speaking to the application. I do have one person on my list, Mr. Joe Enns, and so we'll bring Mr. Enns in and hear from him. There he is. Mr. Enns, if you go ahead and unmute yourself, the floor is yours, sir.
Okay, I think I've joined.
Yes, sir. We have you.
Yes, it's Joe Enns here. It's sort of, I'm representing my mother, who is one of the residents just south of the proposed apartment buildings. And certainly the apartment buildings that are being proposed, I think, are a good thing for Port Elgin. The only thing that you can see from the notes that were forwarded is we were sort of expecting a larger buffer area between properties. One of the questions that I did have was with the apartment building that sort of runs along the Becker and Enns properties, it appears to me that they will be about 7.1 meters setback from the property line. and 4 stories high. So are there going to be balconies on the south facing side of that building?
Well, we can put that question to Mr. Davidson, perhaps, or someone else in that group. Ron?
Yeah, thank you. And John, would you please, through you, Mr. Mayor, would you like to-
Perhaps if Jay could share the screen with the renderings of the buildings, that would be very helpful for Mr. Enns, I think, to understand.
And John, I apologize. I had that in my presentation, asked Jay to turn that on. And
I
I
did
had
see
not
it.
been.
Sorry, I did see it, and it looked like there were balconies. So that's
There
just
are balconies, and you know, with the height of this building at 4 stories, a sunshade study would prove that the cast of you know, the morning sun or the setting sun would not have a huge impact on neighboring properties. It would probably move you know, quickly through the digital horizon in terms of casting shadows at not a very great distance, because it is a pretty low building. Now it is longer, granted, but in terms of building height, I honestly don't think it's a concern. We've built this height of building many times, and we've never had complaints about it in terms of shadows or sunshade study issues.
Yeah, I don't think that was a particular concern to us. I think it was more about we're expecting apartment buildings and then maybe buffered by some other transitional residential units before it before you got to my mother's property. So this is sort of a larger building that's going to dominate her backyard that caught us by surprise.
Yeah, this particular view that you're looking at here, Mr. Enns, is the front of the building where the main entrance is, and parking. The view from your property would be similar, but there would not be a parking lot there.
Right, I get it.
And
But it's only going to, it's going to be
happy to, you know, I'd be happy to build a berm or a privacy fence or whatever is going to, you know, keep you satisfied that
it is, the back of the building is just, it's 7.1 meters from the property line, I believe.
So if we
I
can,
understood the drawing correctly.
so Mr. Enns, why don't you go through, ask whatever questions you have,
Okay.
and then we'll put them to the developer all at once, and just so that we can.
Okay, so the only other question was, how high was the fence, the privacy fence that would be separating the building from my mother's property?
I believe it would be 8 feet.
Okay.
Okay. Any other comments or questions for us, Mr. Enns?
No.
Okay. Okay, that's it then. Well, thank you very much for your input this evening, Mr. Enns, and for your answers, Mr. Davidson and Mr. Nifton. Linda, are there other questions, or pardon me, other members of the public who wish to speak to council on this application this evening?
No, there are not.
Okay. All right. Well, so thank you to the developer and to Mr. Enns then for your comments. And so now that brings us to the end of the public portion of the meeting, and we will go now to members of the committee for their comments or questions. We'll start with Councillor Mayette and then Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. While we're on the theme of parking, which is, I think, one of the reliefs being sought in the bylaw amendment, the street, I guess it's Sierra Street, will be the main access, and from what I can ascertain, it culminates in a cul-de-sac at the end. It doesn't go straight through to County Road 25. Is that correct?
We have a Mr. Davidson.
Yeah, no, sorry, Councilor Myatt, that's not correct. It does go through.
Oh, it'll go right, so you could drive in off 25. Okay, so, but the question, I guess, is for the bylaws. Would there be on-street, I think it's on-street parking allowed on Sierra if there were instances, let's say it's Christmas or Easter or something where there's a lot more visitors than the 10% that would be allowed by the 0.97 per ratio, that there would be available on-street parking on Sierra Street and maybe maybe even the other east-west street. I can't, Ivings Drive, I guess.
Supervisor, Development Services.
Yes, certainly on-street parking would be permitted during our normal permitted times. That is not the winter. You could park during the day all year round, but at night only during the spring, summer, and early fall months.
Right. So that would help alleviate the parking congestion, the reduced parking allotment. So thanks for that question.
I guess it's important to be clear that parking, where parking is permitted or not permitting, is at the discretion of council of the date. So while that may be the case at one time, it may not be the case in the future. Councils will make that decision, right? So just to be clear about that. Are there further? Oh, sorry, Councilor Grace was next. Councilor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have another question about the Sierra Strait extension. Is that something that's going to be paid for by the developer?
So Davidson.
It's will be paid for by the developer, but through the plan of subdivision of Barry's construction. So just to back up a bit, this is not a separate lot just yet. It will be created when, right now there's draft approval on the plan of subdivision that Barry's has. And when he gets final approval, he will be putting the road through.
Thank you.
At no cost to the municipality.
Thank you. I have one more question. Is it the intent of the developer to have, will each apartment have its own laundry facilities within the apartment?
Yes, every apartment unit will have a stacked washer and dryer unit within the apartment unit.
That's great. I was concerned about shared laundry facilities and making sure that there were adequate laundry facilities. So I'm really happy to hear that. Thank you.
Yes, there will be. I had my hand up a little bit, and it could be a bit redundant now, but I did want to get back to the parking just a little bit. Part of the programming of the building, and this is two buildings that we're going to be building at separate times. We're going to build the first building to the north and then see how those units get absorbed into the market before we build the second building. But we are going to be providing 24 three-bedroom unit apartments in each building. And our experience in building three-bedroom units is they are intended for families. So in terms of cars per family, we see many instances where there could be 2 cars per household overall as we're renting out a building. But we also see where there are less than, where there are no cars per unit, because people don't have cars. So we tend to see that it balances out. And we also think that, one of the ways we plan to do our sales and marketing for this building, given the, very good location in Southport Elgin, we think that there's going to be a lot of Bruce Power employees that will be renting here. And we think it would make sense for not just a husband and wife or partners who happen to be living together, but maybe other people in the building that might want a car share down to Bruce Power. So we're pretty convinced that the parking will not be an issue. And, we're going to be offering 1 spot per resident as per the bylaw. And if there is any overflow or, resident guest parking, we think that's going to be made up by the units that where people don't own cars. And that can change on a yearly basis as leases, come due and get renewed and so on. But overall, we see a pretty nice balance. And if there is on-street parking available on Sierra, then that's only going to help the situation as well, we think.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Further comments, Councillor Davinsky, and then I'll get Councillor Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, 124 units, of which 10% will be affordable. What kind of rents are we looking at? You've probably thought that through. What kind of rents are you charging for the units, and what will the affordable units be rented out as?
The affordable units will be rented out at the CMHC has a formula table that they take 30% of the median income of local municipalities. And, the average market rent in this building, I can't tell you at this point in time, Councillor, precisely what those numbers will be, but it's going to be for a 2-bedroom apartment. It'll be somewhere between $1,800 to $2,200 a month. And on the affordable units, and a 1-bedroom is less than that, and the 3 bedrooms are a little bit more than that, but it's in that range. And on the affordable units, we'll be seeing a monthly discount of at least, I would say, $400 to $500. And these are all, I don't make up these formulas. They're done by the CMHC, and it's part of the financing that we get from them in return for building these affordable units. And also part of the qualification process to be able to build affordable units is they have to be built energy efficient. This is the entire buildings, LED lighting in the hallways, lights on timers, and the building from a Hydro One perspective has to be very efficiently designed. Heavy insulation panels in the exterior walls, because part of the goal of CMHC in having reduced rents is also having reduced operating costs. So the two go hand in hand, and we're excited to be a part of this CMHC Select program. It's a really good one.
Okay,
and
thank
it
you.
also provides these leases, the affordable housing leases, they roll for a long time forward. They're not just 1-year deals.
Okay. Then we'll get, thank you. Then we'll get Councillor Jakes.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. You mentioned affordable housing and the fact that you're going for CHMC funding. So
CMHC.
So you would be looking at 30% of income before taxes, as it is on the website. So my question is, when it comes to parking, is that part of the rent or that's included? The reason I ask is a lot of people may not have parking and may not have had automobiles as you stated. So you said there's one per apartment. If they choose not to have a vehicle, would the rent go down? Or is that just overall part of the package for the rent?
Great question. We do not charge for parking. So if you rent a unit, you get a parking spot regardless of whether you have a car or not.
Okay. All right. And the other thing, going down to 12 visitor parking, I noticed on some of the new developments that they do have, one of the concerns for the people that are moving in is there isn't enough visitor parking when they have gone down to a lesser percent. So because we're in a rural community and we don't have a bus transportation system and it is quite a walk, we do have people that come and visit, drop off groceries, that type of thing. So I'm wondering if we might be able to increase the visitor parking just a bit, because a lot of people on affordable housing do have visitors dropping off items and making deliveries. And my only other question is regarding each unit, are they universally designed, as in having rocker switches, a larger bathroom so that there can be turnaround, or if somebody has a scooter, it can be brought into the apartment and stored if somebody has a medical scooter?
Great questions. And I neglected to say that when these units are designed for energy efficiency, they are also designed for handicapped accessibility as well. A certain percentage of them have grab bars in the showers, wheelchair accessible, wider doors within the units. Just a simple thing like the refrigerator, the freezer is in the bottom portion of the refrigerator unit, so that handicapped required people can access those types of things. So yes, there is a percentage that are built accessible.
But you're not planning on doing it for all, so that, not so it looks institutional, but it's just part of the decor and the design, like a vanity without legs so that they can slip under. But if somebody's not or has somebody visiting, they would be able to use it. I'm thinking about visibility as opposed to accessibility.
Are you asking me if we would do that in every single unit?
Like if you might consider doing a bathroom vanity without legs, or rocker switches, light switches, that type of thing. It really isn't much to do, but it just looks different. But it's actually accessible for anybody that might be visiting a unit that is not living there, that wants to visit, but actually won't be able to get in and use the bathroom or reach a light switch or something like that. It's just a thought.
At this point in time, I could tell you that I can't see why I would not consider that.
Yeah, it is a great selling point, especially if people are thinking of having family members, generational families, a mother or dad coming to live with them. So just a thought. Thank you.
And appreciate it. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for those comments. Are there, Councilor Grace?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through you, I forgot to ask about EV charging infrastructure. Are you planning to have that as part of the parking plan?
Yes, there will be plugins, and you're probably going to ask me how many. We've not determined that yet, but we are seeing we're building right now down in Exeter, Ontario. We've just finished up a building. We're also doing one in Peterborough right now, and it's the way of the future. So the whole automotive industry eventually, right around the corner, and Volkswagen has said that 80% of their fleet by 2026 is going to be electric. So we will definitely be including those, Councillor.
Okay, the Vice Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your presentation, John and Ron. And I see Jay is on the call here. Jay, is this kind of application eligible for like the developer in terms of directing 5% of DCs into the housing reserve? Is that something that fees are collectible for that purpose if you've got a willing partner with the developer?
Yes, so the developer is eligible because the bylaw it's built in. So if the developer chooses to allocate a portion of their development charges to the housing reserve, they may do that. They may also, for your information, be eligible for the exemptions depending on the unit mix and what's eventually submitted at the building permit stage.
Okay, John, you've given that some thought about the development charges, the 5%, have you?
We have, and we've given some thought towards developing, a minimum amount of 3-bedroom units to get a break on development charges per se. I think that's.
Thanks, John. And the percentage of, I know we're getting into site plan control here a little bit, but I'm always interested to know at this stage, we're going to be delegating perhaps some of that authority later to staff with site plan. I'm just wondering about the percentage of lands to be landscaped, the whole parcel of land, John. What percentage are we looking at for landscaping for this parcel?
I would have to go off screen here and check my site plan, but I do know that we are within the required amount of landscaping. In fact, I think we're a little bit over it.
Okay, meets that requirement.
Yeah.
Mr. Davidson has a comment.
Yeah, the bylaw requires 30%, Councillor Maya, and it's proposed at 32%.
Thanks, Ron. I appreciate that. And I just think from the resident standpoint in County Road 25, John, I think we really need to work hard. With you talk about the 8-foot fence, the buffering, but I see a tree buffer along there in front of that fence, actually. And take away the whole long fence look. But so I think I hope you pay some attention to that. They have some legitimate concerns there, and so I think the buffering to help those residents is really important. And you spoke to that, John. So I hope that good effort.
Yes, I'm actually I'm happy to meet with Mr. Enns personally. I'll knock on his door next time I'm in Port Elgin, and we'll go over some drawings, and I'll come up with something that is going to make him and his neighbors quite happy.
Okay. My last point, I guess, I'm a little concerned about the 31 visitor parking spaces down to 12, but you know, and Councillor Jakes has mentioned that as well, but I understand the situation you're in. But anyways, I just want to leave it at that. I have a little bit of concern about the parking being reduced 31 to 12, but thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's all I have.
Sure. Are there further questions or comments from members of council? I don't see any. So of course, remember, I've had some good comments here from folks about affordability and accessibility, both really important issues and things that, as you guys have pointed out, this council is quite concerned about, and landscaping and other things. But of course, it's important to remember that regardless of what this applicant is proposing, that the decision we're making about the zoning extends forever, right? So it doesn't really, although what Mr. Nifton and Mr. Davidson are talking about are interesting things, and we're interested in exploring them with them. Our key consideration today has to be about whether it's appropriate for this parcel to have the density of housing on it that's being proposed, whether it's appropriate for this parcel to have the parking provisions be as they're proposed here, and the other relief that's requested, not only for this development, but for all future developments on the site. So that's really what council is considering here today. And on that note, I wonder, and perhaps I can put this to the planner. So generally, you have this 90 unit per gross hectare limitation in the R4 zone, but this particular parcel has a special provision, R4-7, which further restricts that to 36 dwelling units. And I just wonder why. Do we have any idea why that particular additional restriction was placed on this particular parcel?
Mr. Mayor, if you're asking me.
I was asking the planner, actually, does the planner have an answer?
Oh, sorry.
Yes, thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. My understanding is that there was a restriction placed. It's not clear at this point. I can certainly look into it further, but I'll defer to Mr. Davidson if he perhaps has the answer to that question.
Sure. Do you have an answer, Mr. Davidson?
Actually, I was going to say, no, I didn't. I did ask around. I asked your staff, and nobody seems to know why that was placed on there.
Okay. I mean, Jay, do you have an idea? Is you flashing on there?
I'm only flashing on to say that no one on this call was around when that plan was draft approved. Well, maybe perhaps Linda, but it wouldn't be fair to, you know, ask her to clarify that, because it was all done by Mr. Kaparis, the previous owner.
Right. Mr. Nifton, do you have an idea?
No, but I can tell you the first time I ever met Jay Posner, it was the first question I asked him, because it didn't make sense to me.
Sure. I mean, so one thing I would say is to staff, go around the horn one more time. If you have to talk to Linda or anybody else, talk to them and see if there's any particular reason why that restriction is in place. And if there is no good reason, then come back to council when you make your recommendation and advise us that there is no good reason for that restriction, because it's notable. I mean, it was intentionally done for some reason, and I would be interested to know why. Beyond that, I don't have a lot of other questions or comments. I think most of the issues have been covered off. So if there's nothing further from any of the members, then we will bring us to the end of this first public meeting of the evening. And maybe I'll just ask the planner if she can just advise the public if they want more information or want to be informed as to when this is coming back to council for a decision, how they can stay in touch on that subject.
Yes, anyone wanting to receive notice on this particular application can reach out to the county through either by phone or by email. Our email is bcplpe@brucecounty.on.ca.
Okay, thank you very much. And that brings us to the end of this public meeting. Thank you all for your input. All right. So now we are on to our second Public meeting of the evening, 5.2, which is Z 2021-086, Alexander Fraser and Michelle Pauchuk for 530 Izzard Road. And we'll turn it over to our planner, Ms. Barbara McGobbin.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, committee. I'll just load up the presentation. So we have received an application to amend the zoning bylaw as it relates to the property 530 Izzard Road. This property is located on the eastern shoreline of the lake in the township of Saugeen. The site abuts an open road allowance at the rear, and further to the west is the lake. This photo just shows existing development on the site. It's currently occupied by a cottage and a
Ms.
shed.
McGobbin, wait, we don't have your, not seeing your screen. Oh,
Okay,
you see it now. Okay, sorry, carry on.
all right. Okay, you're able to see it?
Yes, we see it now.
Okay, so the site is occupied by a 3-season cottage and a shed. This photo was taken from the shore road allowance, and it just shows the rear of the property. As you can see, the site is, the cottage is surrounded by mature vegetation. The landowner is proposing a 4-season replacement dwelling. The original proposal, which we circulated to the departments and agencies and to members of the public, was to construct the dwelling at the same footprint as the current structure. And that structure is actually entirely within the environmental protection zone and also partially within the road allowance. The Conservation Authority reviewed the proposal and required a dynamic beach assessment or a coastal study because the lands are within the hazard area of Lake Huron shoreline where development is not permitted. The assessment was to determine the limit of the hazard and to advise if there would be an unacceptable risk to public safety and to property. So what came out of that assessment is that the proposed structure would be outside the flooding hazard, but within the erosion hazard of the dynamic beach. The Conservation Authority has explained that erosion hazards of the dynamic beach can be severe enough to pose a risk to public health and safety. As such, the Conservation Authority required an alternative location of the dynamic beach, an alternative location outside of the dynamic beach hazard. This is the current proposal, a revised proposal. The proposed structure has shifted 4.5 meters to the east or inland, which is away from the hazard. And this has satisfied the Conservation Authority. The shift in location has coincidentally taken the structure outside the shore road allowance, which is a positive change. Another improvement is that development will now provide a small rear yard setback, whereas in the past there has been no rear yard setback. So the purpose of this application is to amend the environmental protection zone by adding provisions to permit a replacement dwelling. Relief is requested to reduce the rear yard setback from 7.5 meters to 2 meters. No changes are proposed to the R1 zone, which is the front area of the site. Some additional information from a land use perspective. This site is in Port Elgin, which is a settlement area under the provincial policy statement. Settlement areas are intended for growth and development. The site is designated primary urban communities and hazard land areas in the Bruce County official plan. Residential uses are permitted within the primary urban communities, but not in the hazard land areas. The site is designated shoreline residential in the local official plan and environmental hazard in in most of the site. The zoning is residential first density R1 and environmental protection. We have received no objections from the Bruce Gray Catholic District School Board, from the historic Saugeen Métis. Town staff have commented that any remnant encroachments on town land or on the shore road allowance, such as the existing patio, should be removed to the town's satisfaction. The Conservation Authority submitted 2 sets of comments. The first set was in relation to the original proposal. Then there's a subsequent set of comments which finds this application acceptable now that it has been revised. They have commented that most of the site is within the dynamic beach hazard of the Lake Huron shoreline, and the most western portion of the property is within the wave uprush hazard. Development or site alteration within these areas and their adjacent lands require permission from the Conservation Authority. Based on a site-specific dynamic beach assessment, the reconstruction will have a negligible impact on the dynamic beach and should not interfere with the natural coastal processes. They have recommended that the county and the municipality update their hazard mapping to reflect their updated hazard mapping based on the submitted coastal hazard assessment. They've also indicated that although the proposed development is within significant wildlife habitat and within the adjacent lands of fish habitat, there is existing development of similar size and impact. The impact to fish habitat will be negligible if the proper erosion and sediment control measures are implemented during construction to prevent the migration of sediment off-site or into Lake Huron. We have not received any comments from members of the public. So as a summary, this zoning bylaw amendment is seeking to permit a replacement dwelling within the environmental protection zone. Relief is requested to reduce the rear yard setback from 7.5 meters to 2 meters. The application is supported by a coastal assessment study. The recommendation is for committee to receive this application. The intent is to come back in the near future with a recommendation report that would address any comments that may be presented tonight. That concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to take questions if there are any.
Hey, thank you, Ms. Mugabe. All right, so with that, that will open up the public portion of this public meeting. And I do have one member of the public, the applicant, here on my list wishing to speak to us. That's Sandy Fraser. And is Ms. Fraser on the line? Does she wish to speak to us?
Here you go.
Oh, Mr. Fraser, my apologies.
That's okay. Thank you, Your Worship, councillors. I think Barbara's presentation is probably better than anything I could say. So if there's, I'm just here in case anybody has any questions.
Okay, good enough. We'll bear that in mind. Are there, Linda, are there other members of the public wishing to speak to us this evening on this application?
No, there are not, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so that is our only public intervention then. So we will turn things over then to members of the committee, and I'll ask if any members have questions or comments around the application. I don't see any. I just for myself and it's maybe not well, it's not necessarily directly to do with the application, but the SPCA's approach to Izzard Road is perplexing, to say the least. If you look at the hazard map, excuse me, that they presented showing the extent of the hazard along Izzard Road, you can see that in many cases, they themselves have drawn the hazard line around the buildings along Izzard Road. My guess is, and this is, I'm no coastal engineer, but my guess is the hazards don't conveniently conform to the exterior of the buildings that those have specifically been drawn that way to accommodate those buildings. But so some neighbors on the road have that opportunity to build on their site without the SVCA regulating. But Mr. Fraser doesn't have that. It goes right past his place to the east and doesn't go around his home, right? But 2 doors down, it does. So it's confusing why the SVCA has insisted on pushing Mr. Fraser around, but his neighbors got the place with the line going around it. So it's confusing to me. I don't the way the dynamic beach is being implemented here is odd. I think that and the fact that Mr. Fraser, you've had to bend over backwards and shift 4 meters this way and 5 meters that way at the whim of the conservation authorities. Sort of, I don't know what they're basing these decisions on, but it seems hard to understand when you look at the map of Izard Road. Anyway, that's just my thoughts. Anyway, are there any other questions or comments? I don't see any. So, well, thank you very much, Mr. Fraser, for coming in this evening. And I'll just turn things over. Or did you have a comment, Mr. Fraser? Sorry.
Yes, I just, my only question is that we've never done anything like this before, Mr. Mayor. So I'm not sure what the next step is for us.
Yeah, well, certainly we can lay that out for you right now. And maybe Ms. Smith, you can tell Mr. Fraser what the next step is, and you can tell the public how they can be kept informed of those next steps.
Sure, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I don't mean to step on Barb's toes, but I did turn my camera on. But
that was my mistake. Sorry about that.
That's okay. The next step in the process would be to bring a recommendation report back. So provided that we can answer any questions that may have come out of this meeting, we will include that in the report and bring a recommendation back to the next meeting of this committee.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Okay. And can you give us, for anybody who might be watching this evening, Karina, just that information on how to stay in touch on this file?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Anyone who's looking to receive notice with respect to this application can reach out to the county by phone or email. Our email address is bcplpe@brucecounty.on.ca.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so that brings us to the end of our public meetings for this evening, and we'll move on then to 6.2 reports, and we have one report there, 6.2.1, which is a staff report on delegation of site plan approval and the supervisor development services.
Yes, thank you again, Mr. Mayor. This is a follow-up to changes to the Planning Act, which this council is well aware of. Changes recently made to the Planning Act require the appointment of an employee, officer, or agent of the municipality to act as the approval authority for site plans under Section 41. So the report outlines how we intend to approach that with the recommended appointment of the CAO. I do want to provide some additional context, if I can, is that part of the changes to the Act required that site plans be approved within 60 days of complete applications. And there are penalties, or will be penalties, imposed on municipalities that don't meet those timelines, with progressive requirements to refund applications for site plan approval as outlined in the Act. Though there's not a lot of detail yet in how that's to be carried out, it is a requirement. And so at this time, we're recommending you appoint the CAO to approve site plans in with I've called it as a full delegation, subject to the requirements of the Highway Corridor Site Plan Design Guidelines, and that staff and the town will work to create additional guidelines so that council can be confident in how site plan approval will be administered. We'll have guidelines for additional residential units, which is a guide that's being prepared as we move through the additional residential unit policy update. And two new guidelines you have not been informed of until tonight is the infill intensification guide and a greenfield development guide. And those cover the majority, together with the highway commercial, cover the majority of where the development is occurring in town. But we're also looking at, once those approved guidelines in place, the reviews will proceed through the staff delegation process as outlined and not be required to submit applications, such as with ARUs. And until guidelines are in place, staff will provide information reports to council for input at the appropriate stage in the process. And I guess I'll leave it there. In the long term, we think having delegated approval or appointed authority for site plans is a worthy goal. And we want to make sure those guidelines are as effective as they can be at addressing town needs and desires.
Okay, thank you, Jay. There is a recommendation that council pass a bylaw appointing the CAO or designate with the authority to approve site plans and drawings in accordance with Section 41 of the Planning Act. Questions or comments from members of the committee? Councilor Briggs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Jay, for the report. A couple of things. I think that this is going to be, I hope that this will be a great opportunity for us to refresh, maybe revisit and strengthen the highway corridor design guidelines, because we see so much development, and it's a very visible part of our community that people drive past, and I think this for me, I've always talked about the fact that we should be encouraging developers, and maybe not just encouraging, but integrating into our design guidelines and our policy requirements for developers to come up with design that complements the character of our community, that marine heritage, or all of those charms of our community that people want to live in and want to visit. So I'd like to see that happening. I also wonder, I know that this isn't really strictly speaking related to the highway, but I would like us to try to work on facade policy in our downtown area. Because as far as I know right now, we don't, other than sign bylaws, we don't have anything to to try and once again support that character issue in terms of our facade designs, which I think is really an important part of our downtowns and makes our downtowns really appealing. So I guess the other thing that I wanted to talk about is just revisiting the setback issue in the core commercial area. And the core commercial area, as I think you mentioned a couple of times, doesn't have setbacks. And I don't know, I mean, I guess it depends on the individual development. But I know that the highway design guidelines do talk about, and the corridor guidelines do talk about making sure that new developments, whether they are built new or renovations, that they complement adjacent buildings. And especially when we have residential areas that abridge new commercial developments or even renovated commercial developments. I think it only strengthens the area when you have a design that that complements that kind of residential neighbor, and it adds to the quality of life for those residential neighbors as well. But I think it's great to see highway developments that do have side-by-side residential and commercial developments. But I think we need to. My concern about no setbacks is that may be, may not quite fit with some of the residential neighbors. So those are my comments.
Okay. All right, thank you. Are there further comments from members? Councillor Mayak, and then Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With reference to the recommendation for the delegation of site plan approval, it's unfortunate that we find ourselves in this situation that we have to do this, but as Jay astutely pointed out, the 60-day rule will definitely come into play, and if this is one method in which we can strengthen our processes so that we don't get caught in situations where we're funding development fees, then I guess it's something we have to do. So for that reason, I'm supporting this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to Jay, I guess, on this one. Just to follow up, I guess, on the last two questions. Now that we're delegating this authority off, not really at our choice. We do have a say, though, if I'm not mistaken, as we can set the guidelines. Is that correct, Jay? I guess first, so we'd be looking now, I guess, but my follow-up question to that is what I'm getting at is to when will we see kind of an updated list of guidelines, or when will we have if we pass this, then we've delegated off the duties as of whenever this comes into effect. When will we have a look at that guideline or the checklist that the developer will be getting, basically?
Well, certainly, yes. So the answer to the first part, Mr. Mayor and Councillor, is that yes, the council will get to approve the guidelines. And with the highway corridor design guidelines, they were endorsed by council in 2019 through the development guide. They were updated in 2018 and then refined based on the recommendations of Stantec in the 2019 version. The other guidelines that I've identified, we'll be preparing them as soon as we can. Of course, there's lots in the business plan still, but the bylaw itself for delegation needs to come into effect before July 1st or at July 1st. So any site plans after July 1st are required to be under the appointed authority of whomever is identified in the bylaw. So I don't know if that provides any information for you other than we want to work on the guidelines so that council is in control of those guidelines so that they have, if council is satisfied that those guidelines will be implemented appropriately.
Yeah, that's good for now.
Okay. The Vice Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. See you to JJ. The delegation authority is happening. Obviously, the province is saying this will happen, and so I get that part. I guess what I'm asking you is that, what say does this council have in terms of? Let's talk about landscape coverage for 1 second. We had a development south end of town. There was a 50 or 60, 70. I think it was an 80 unit motel unit down there, looking at 16, 17% lot coverage for landscape. And this council didn't like that. And we passed on to staff and developer that no, we like to see that higher, and they come back at 28, 30%, which is great. They're a gateway into our community. They should be landscape 28, 30%. But that came as a result of council speaking up, saying no, we're not happy with 17, 18%. Now, the delegation of authority to staff, if staff felt at that point in time that at 18% was fine, then we locked into that 17, 18%, or was the design guidelines, was the guidelines dictate that? I guess my point is, what kind of protection do we have as a council to ensure that the numbers that some of these developers might want to see, and staff say, yeah, we like it. What say do we have as a council?
That's a very good question, if I may answer. There's several layers of defense, if you want to characterize it as that. So to protect the town's interest, you need to defend the town's interests. And the primary tools that we have through the Planning Act are limited, but they do have certain effects. So under the official plan, you can set out the parameters I would say you should use the official plan more strategically to identify the major parameters of what you're going to regulate with other tools. One of the primary tools is the zoning bylaw. And as you know, in the case of the project at the south end of Port Elgin, one of the tools within the zoning bylaw is the landscaped open space requirement. We're allowed by the Planning Act and through that zoning bylaw to set an amount of landscaped open space that we want to allow. So no less than 30%. And any change to that isn't a staff approval. It's actually has to be through council, through an amendment to the bylaw or the committee of adjustment, if it's, relatively minor. And that's an appropriate spot for council to have that debate, because they'll be able to talk about the larger image and the impact that landscape would have in that area of town or in that property. The fine details, which say is the next layer down, are generally through the guidelines, where you're expressing the types of things you want to see in the landscaped area. You want to see this mix of shrubbery, trees, this style of the amount of shade. You want coniferous, deciduous. You want a fence buffer. The zoning bylaw wasn't built for that kind of. I don't think, at least the act is built for that kind of refined examination, but you still have the guidelines. Alternative approaches to that, and we're going through that with our affordable housing CPPS, is another tool under the Planning Act, this planning permit system, where you could set out arrangements where there's not discretion per se, but things that need to happen in order to get approval, and that itself would be approved by council. Now we're working on that for housing. Maybe it can evolve over time to deal with other issues, but I'm just outlining the various options and layers that council has to protect its interests. And then, in the approach that we want to take, I think it's appropriate to have a good sense of what you want, but allow for the good judgment and flexibility for developers when they come in to see if they're confronted with an issue, give them a few options to consider. One of them might be an amendment to the bylaw, but there might be alternative approaches for how they want to address an issue through the guidelines. And maybe I'm stating it too generally, but I think there are enough things, at least that we have at our disposal, are going to be developing, and say in the case of greenfield development or infill development, that we can use that can express council's concerns as well as we can as we're implementing it for the developers.
Okay. Thanks for that, Jay. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Are there any further comments? I think, and as Jay pointed out, there are good ways to do this, defensible ways that work really well. I've been a proponent myself of the community planning permit system for a long time. I think that's a great way to incorporate site plan, zoning, OP, put it all together and do it in one smooth process. And I think it's good. The thing about this is that we're being sort of rushed in some direction and forced to do it piecemeal. And I think that just because the minister dreams up an idea in March doesn't mean that we need to chase our tails to implement it by July. We can delegate the final sign off to the CAO, and we can take our time to develop the appropriate process, but essentially keep doing things the way we've been doing them, which I think is what we ought to do. Really, I'm not entirely comfortable at this point with doing a full-on delegation on the basis of the highway corridor design guidelines, because council, I don't think council actually ever directly approved the highway corridor design guidelines. They are included in our development guide as an appendix, but council didn't envision that document. Council envisioned that document as informing staff as part of its decision-making process, but did not envision the document as supplanting council's role in the process. And I think we have to look at it with fresh eyes if that's what we're doing, just like all these other guidelines that you're talking about developing. I think we need to develop a comprehensive set of guidelines, possibly through a community planning permit system. I think that would be the gold standard, frankly. But if we can't get there because that's too high a bar, then at least develop the guidelines, put them together for the whole community, council adopts them all at once, and then we have a clear sense of what we're doing. Let's do that on our timeline. Let's not be shoehorned into it by the province. Instead, let's just delegate as of July 1st, the final sign off. Instead of me signing it, the CAO signs it. And these things get reported to council, just like you've proposed in here, except on the highway. But I think in every case, they should get reported to council as information reports. Council can give some input. The CAO and staff can consider that and do the final sign off. So I think we should. So I don't have difficulty with the recommendation apart from the inclusion of the highway commercial, the 100% delegation on the highway commercial, or pardon me, the highway corridor design guidelines. I think we should remove that. I think all site plans should come to us as information reports until the full slate of guidelines are developed. And then we approve it and move forward. So I can't support the recommendation as written because I don't fully support the report. My preference would be for council to give some direction to ask for all site plans to come before us until new guidelines are developed to cover the whole community. So that's my position on it. Is there any other comments? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you. I totally agree with what you're saying. I believe council does need to have a final say in this. So if a motion is required, I'd like to make that at this point.
Motion to direct that all site plans.
All
come
site
back.
plans come back to council.
Those are seconds. So I'll take Councillor Carr as a seconder of that. Are we clear on that? Jay, is that clear? If we were to pass that resolution, that just, are you clear on what that means?
I'm not. I guess I'd like a bit of exposition. I mean, at this point, the legislation doesn't allow it for final approval. So that to me, a resolution. Yeah.
Yes, sorry about that. And that's maybe my lack of clarity. It's not a question of, so the intent is that we would see, just like you proposed for all site plans apart from the highway corridor, we're suggesting you do that for all site plans, including the highway corridor. But that final approval. So they come as information reports to council. Council gives input. Staff, the CAO has the final sign off and gives final approval. And if, in accordance with the legislation.
And if you are, going to be speaking or directing Kara to speak here in a minute, depending on what she says, I may have more to add to that, but I want to listen to what she says first. I'm not going to argue with you, Kara. No. It's more of, I just want to understand what you're saying.
No, and you need to be clear, so I appreciate you, the CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the one piece I wanted just to direct council's attention to was those timelines. And so I think what I would like to suggest is that the report could move forward tonight with the delegation to the CAO, but that we come back with a subsequent report that outlines the process that the applications will go through in order to meet the 60-day time frame, so that council can see that from start to finish, the process that the applications would go through, and then we can make decisions on how to move it forward based on that process outline.
Yeah, I think I'd like us to direct, in accordance with the motion that was just put, us to direct staff to return to council with all the site plans as information reports. And so we give you that direction. You can come back to us and show us what that process looks like. And if you're likely to miss the 60-day timeline, I'm frankly not that concerned about the 60-day timeline. I would rather do it right than do it for the money. And so I think I would like us to focus on getting a good process rather than we don't do that many site plans. I don't think the hit to the bottom line is going to be that significant. So I'd rather make sure we have a good process, a solid process that works for the community, rather than have all of our decisions dictated by whether we might lose a few bucks on application fees. So, so I'd like to see if we can give you that direction tonight to return to us with all the site plans as information reports. We give input, you give final approval, then you can return to us with a report saying, okay, council, you've given us that direction. Here's what that process looks like. You may not hit your 60-day deadline. Are you prepared to accept that, et cetera, et cetera? And then we can go from there. Does that make sense? Do you understand that? Am I being clear?
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Mayor, I think, and we'll also outline in that report the number of site plan applications that we do see. We can look at 2021 as a reference point. I noticed Jay's expression there when you noted that we don't see too many site plans. And I just offer that by potentially creating a situation where we do have to refund, we are creating a new process for staff that currently doesn't exist, which is a time demand on our current staff load. So but we can report on all of that in our report back to you.
Not to quibble, but the important thing to remember there is that we didn't create it, the province did, and we can always send them the bill, the supervisor development services.
Yeah, so I'm happy that I'm not going to be contradicting Kara right now. But I think the main issue for me, my perspective, and the reason why I was seeking clarification is not necessarily related to timing. It's related to quality. Is that generally now, and we'll report on this with the updated report about the process, is council seeing site plans that are pretty high quality. In other words, they've already been through staff review. And we've been able to identify and direct and encourage them to implement the guidelines that exist, or in the cases where none exist, just the policy and our good judgment, because we're planners and experts in our fields. And so, and this will be part of the report, is what quality of drawing will council get? At first submission, well, okay, I'll check my language. It's generally pretty bad. Like it's just a step up from concept, and to share that with council feels like a muddy, mucky sort of time to share with council. What are you going to be able to contribute? And this is not to say you wouldn't have valuable comment, but there are gaps, sometimes pretty big gaps in the site plans where they don't even show any landscaping. Well, what the heck? Why would I want to show that to council? So I just expressed the quality of the submission. It'd be a little fun discussion about how we fit that in the process.
Yes. Well, you guys do tremendous work, and you always have. And I think that, and we've always had an excellent site plan process throughout my entire experience. And as the Vice Deputy Mayor rightly points out, our staff brings us the tremendous work. And sometimes, and not very often, but on the rare occasion, as the people's representatives, we have valuable input that moves it in the right direction. And gets a good outcome for the public, right? Most times we don't have to change it at all. Most times the work is outstanding and hits the nail on the head. Unfortunately, the province has done this to us and forced us into making these kinds of trade-offs. But I think you'll understand that council can't trade off the public's role in this and those positive outcomes that we can deliver without taking some more time to think it through and having those processes in place and understood. I think it's something that I think it's an important responsibility that we can't just trade off, and we're going to have to find a way. But you'll bring a report, and we'll have the discussion again. There is a motion on the table with regard to the direction. Does everyone understand the motion that is on the table? Everyone's clear? The Vice Deputy Mayor.
I would like clarification, Mr. Mayor, because our Deputy Mayor said bring a report back that says that council will go back to approving site plan controls. That confused me. So I just want to make sure that I really want a clarification what the motion reads.
Sure, I'll articulate it, and the mover and seconder can let me know if I'm not getting their intention correct. But the intention is that we're directing staff to return to council with all site plans as information reports for council input, and that final approval in accordance with the legislation will be given by the CAO. But all site plans will come to council as information reports. Is that accurately articulating, Councillor Carr and the Deputy Mayors? Is that clear, Vice Deputy Mayor?
Just now, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Everyone's clear. So that's the motion. I'll ask all in favor of that. And opposed? That's carried. Okay. So if there's nothing further, I think that answers the question that's in the original recommendation. So I don't think we need to go consider the original recommendation. So that brings us to the end of that discussion then. And we are now on to adjournment. And I have a resolution that this planning committee meeting of May 16, 2022 hereby adjourns at 7:53 p.m. As mover and seconder, the Deputy Mayor and Councilor Grace. All in favor?